Inside a cold, forgotten shelter cage, a shattered German shepherd named Shadow waits in silent agony. Once a hero, now discarded by the police, branded dangerous, and sentenced to vanish where hope goes to die. Yet just as despair threatens to consume him, the autumn air brings a stranger to the gate, a man with eyes darkened by grief, his past intertwined with the dog's lost glory. Why does this ferocious canine tremble and weep when the man draws near? What hidden truth could transform a forsaken outcast into the very key to unmasking betrayal, injustice, and a redemption nobody dared imagine? Where are you as this story unfolds? In the comfort of your home, or somewhere deeper, where sorrow and hope entwine? Share your thoughts below, and don't look away, for this ending will shatter your heart, only to piece it back together. At Windgate Rescue Center, a heavy Montana sunrise pressed through dirty glass, glancing off metal cages and damp concrete floors. Mondays always brought tension, but this one, it seemed, carried a special kind of dread. In the farthest kennel, separated from all the other animals, Shadow, a battered German shepherd, still large despite his months of decline, lay pressed against the cold wall. The light barely touched him. It wasn't just the chill in the room that made staff hurry past. It was the red warning sign on his door, the word danger, blaring like an accusation above his trembling body. No one at Windgate had seen the shepherd's so-called aggression firsthand, but everyone had heard the story. He'd arrived after a late-night incident. Sirens, angry voices, a battered police officer, a mother crying outside the shelter gates. Details blurred with gossip until Shadow, once a canine, became a monster in the community's eyes. Most of the staff moved with uneasy compassion around his cage. Some, like Dr. Amelia Carter, felt a piercing sense of responsibility, while others, especially the new volunteers, looked at Shadow with fear, thinly veiled, as pity. He rarely barked, never lunged, but his silence was oppressive, a living echo of trauma. Whenever a staff member reached for his bowl or tried to speak softly, Shadow just curled tighter, muzzle flat on his paws, eyes flickering from shadow to shadow, never holding anyone's gaze. Outside the chain-link fence, the town's anxiety was louder. A crowd had gathered, carrying hand-painted signs, "No dangerous dogs in Windgate," and "Our kids come first." The chanting was angry, sharp with fear, and as the morning wore on, it seemed to creep through the shelter's walls, seeping into every corner. Several news vans were parked nearby, and Amelia glimpsed a reporter rehearsing lines about the latest threat to community safety. She felt each word like a slap, knowing that the truth, the real, complicated story, would be drowned out by public outrage. Inside, the staff scrambled to keep up appearances, but the atmosphere was brittle. Even the most seasoned handlers were tense, triple-checking locks and glancing out the window whenever the crowd's shouting surged. Some wondered aloud if keeping Shadow was worth the risk. Their questions punctuated by the anxious whine of puppies and the restless pacing of old dogs in cages. Windgate had always been a place for second chances, but Shadow's presence threatened to turn hope into scandal. Dr. Amelia Carter, with her hair pulled back tight and eyes tired from too many sleepless nights, stood at the window, hands balled into fists, as she watched the protest grow. Her phone vibrated constantly, messages from the board, emails from donors, calls from her boss, Carol Voss. The last voicemail still rang in her ears. "Amelia, if there's one more headline, one more incident, we will have no choice but to let you go. This shelter can't afford another controversy." Amelia swallowed, feeling the weight of every expectation, every fragile hope pinned on her, and wondered how she'd ever explain that Shadow was more than his label. In the staff room, the tension broke into open anxiety. Marlene, the shelter's senior caretaker, paced in circles as she updated Amelia. "They want a decision now. Either he's transferred out or, well, you know how these stories go." Others nodded grimly, their eyes darting to the window where the crowd pressed closer to the fence. "If we get shut down," another staffer muttered, "all these animals lose everything." Amelia fought the urge to shout back, to remind them that Shadow's life was hanging by a thread, that fear didn't make a verdict, but she only managed a brittle silence, because in this world, fear always shouted louder. Suddenly, the front door slammed, and Noah Dalton, a quiet volunteer with a gift for reading nervous animals, hurried inside. His hands shook as he held out a white envelope. "Someone taped this to the door," he whispered, eyes wide. Amelia took it, her pulse racing. Inside, on a crumpled page, were 7 words printed in thick black marker. If you let it out, you will pay. A cold hush fell over the room. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, the threat feeling all too real against the backdrop of jeers outside. Amelia clutched the note, every muscle tensed. "We're on our own now," she murmured. She thought about locking the doors, about calling the police, but what police would come to protect a dog most of the town had already condemned? As the day faded into uneasy twilight, Shadow remained in his cage, head low, breath shallow, ears twitching at every distant shout. Amelia tried to focus on her work but kept returning to the shepherd's file, wishing for an answer, a way out. That evening, as the crowd dispersed and the shelter grew quiet, Noah slipped into the records room, unable to shake the feeling that they were missing something. While searching through a dusty box of intake files, his fingers brushed against a photograph. Shadow, upright and proud, standing beside a black officer in a crisp K9 unit vest. The file detailed acts of heroism, including medals and a commendation from the mayor, a dog who had once saved lives, not threatened them. Noah's heart pounded as he realized the truth. Shadow wasn't a monster. He was a hero, cast aside and condemned for reasons nobody seemed to care about anymore. In that moment, he knew he couldn't walk away. Noah would find out what happened to the shepherd, even if it meant challenging the town's worst fears and risking the wrath of those who wanted Shadow forgotten. The shelter was silent long after midnight, the kind of uneasy hush that made every floorboard creak feel like a warning. Out back, the lights of the Windgate protest had faded, but a nervous energy still lingered in the air, hanging between the rows of sleeping animals and the flickering monitor in the main hallway. In the far end of the building, behind a metal door with a fading staff-only sign, Noah Dalton hunched over a battered desk in the archive room, the blue glow of an old computer screen casting shadows across his face. Noah's heart raced as he navigated the tangle of dusty folders, half-forgotten paperwork, and ancient hard drives. He'd waited until the last staff member's car pulled away, knowing Amelia Carter was probably somewhere in the medical bay, hunched over ledgers or drafting one more desperate grant application to keep the shelter alive. Every click of his mouse sounded thunderous in the stillness. His hands shook, not just with fear of being caught, but with something deeper, the sense that the story everyone believed about Shadow had never quite added up. In the hallway, the security camera's red LED pulsed steadily. Noah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but he pressed on, digging through electronic folders and paper files alike, driven by the haunting image he'd found that afternoon, the proud shepherd standing beside an officer, not a monster, but a partner. Yet, in the official records, everything was redacted. Incidents, dates, and names were blacked out, and any file marked Shadow seemed to end abruptly with the word Strandsmere stamp in cold blue ink. Desperate, Noah rifled deeper until his fingers brushed against the edge of a faded envelope wedged at the back of the lowest drawer. It was sealed with yellowed tape and stamped confidential in block letters. Inside, he found a thin packet of paperwork, a laminated badge, and, most startling, a USB drive taped to a note that read simply, "For legal use only. Destroy if compromised." With trembling hands, he slid the USB into the computer and held his breath as a video file flickered to life. On the screen, a dimly lit backyard filled with shouting voices, a man in a sheriff's uniform, an argument escalating, Shadow barking but not attacking. Then, chaos. The officer shouting orders, the shepherd lunging, not at the officer but towards a second figure with a weapon drawn. The frame froze on Shadow standing protectively between the fallen officer and the suspect, teeth bared but posture defensive, not aggressive. Seconds later, the video cut out, replaced by a time-stamped police report that read only, "Canine dog initiated attack. Officer injured. Dog removed from service." Noah's mind reeled. None of the stories circulating in town matched what he was seeing. Shadow hadn't attacked an innocent. He'd intervened, possibly saving a life. The community's version of the story, used to fuel their outrage, had twisted reality into something monstrous. As Noah replayed the video, the soft hum of the building's HVAC was interrupted by the squeal of old hinges. Dr. Amelia's silhouette filled the doorway, her face pinched with exhaustion and suspicion. "Noah? What are you doing in here?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the cramped room. Noah scrambled to hide the folder, his cheeks flushing. He tried to explain about the file, the video, and how none of it matched what the shelter had been told, but Amelia cut him off, her words sharp. You're not authorized to access those records. If someone finds out you've been snooping, we could lose everything, Noah. The board's watching for any excuse to shut us down." Noah, desperate, tried to reason with her, his voice trembling. "But Amelia, this isn't right." The report was altered. The video shows Shadow wasn't the attacker. He clicked play, showing her the crucial moments. For a moment, Amelia's stern expression wavered. She leaned closer, her brow furrowing as she watched the shepherd shield the officer, his body language clear and protective. But as the last frame faded to black, Amelia shook her head. "Even if what you found is true, it won't matter to the people out there," she said quietly, glancing toward the window where the memory of chanting still lingered. "They want a villain, not the truth. If anyone learns we're questioning the official story, the blowback will be worse than anything we've seen. The shelter's already hanging by a thread." Noah felt the weight of those words, heavy and unyielding. He understood her fear. He felt it too, but he couldn't let it end there. The dog in that cage, once a hero, was now being condemned by a lie, and the real story was buried beneath fear, prejudice, and red tape. A sudden beep from Amelia's phone broke the tense silence. She glanced at the screen, frowning. "Shelter line? Voicemail. Someone called just now." Her hands moved automatically as she played back the message. The voice on the recording was deep, hesitant, but insistent. "My name is Marcus Ellison. I need to talk to someone about your shepherd, Shadow. Please call me back. It's important." Noah and Amelia exchanged a look, their anxiety replaced by a flicker of hope. Someone out there knew more. Someone wasn't afraid to speak. The secrets swirling around Shadow's past might finally be forced into the light. Noah leaned forward, urgency igniting his tone. "There's something wrong with the whole case, Amelia. Someone wanted Shadow gone and they nearly succeeded. But if we don't act, we're no better than the people who buried the truth." The shelter's halls remained eerily quiet, but outside the world was shifting. As dawn threatened to break over Windgate, the fragile alliance between Noah and Amelia set a new course, one that would challenge everything the town believed about justice, loyalty, and second chances. The early morning air inside the Windgate shelter's security office was thick with tension, lingering like static just before a thunderstorm. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, bouncing harsh reflections off laminated clipboards and metal keyrings. Dr. Amelia Carter hadn't slept, her mind battered by visions of protests, headline scandals, and the weight of her career hanging by a thread. She stared at the shelter's main phone, the red message light still blinking, as if the last voicemail could detonate the whole fragile operation with a single push. Noah Dalton slipped quietly into the cramped room, clutching a thermos of burnt coffee and scanning Amelia's drawn face. The revelations of last night, the hidden file, the truth in that grainy video, still echoed in his thoughts. They'd agreed, for now, to keep what they'd learned between them, but the shelter itself seemed to pulse with restless secrets, as if the walls were holding their breath for what might come next. Amelia hesitated for a long moment, then pressed play again on the voicemail. The deep voice on the recording sounded strained, desperate, the message clear. "This is Marcus Ellison. I know what you're hiding about that shepherd, and I need to see him. He saved my life. If you refuse, I'll make sure every news channel in America knows the truth you've been trying to bury." The words hung between them. Noah watched the flicker of something, fear, hope, maybe both, in Amelia's eyes as she listened. He tried to read her, searching for any sign she might be willing to bend, but she straightened, voice low and tight. "This is bigger than us. Noah, if we let him in, and the wrong people find out, the fallout could shut us down for good. It's not just my job on the line. It's every animal in this place." Outside the office window, a lone security guard made his rounds along the chain-link fence, pausing to glance toward the isolation unit where Shadow lay curled in his kennel, oblivious to the storm he'd stirred. The protests had simmered down, for now, but every local news van was still circling, hungry for any hint of scandal. Amelia was painfully aware of how quickly the tides could turn. Noah set down his coffee and leaned in, voice urgent but measured. "What if he's our only shot at clearing Shadow's name?" he pressed. "You saw that video. The whole thing was twisted to fit a story they needed, one that made a hero into a villain. We owe it to the truth to let Marcus speak." But Amelia shook her head, her resolve stiffening. "And what if it backfires? What if Ellison's story goes public, and the shelter becomes a battleground in some cable news war? We could lose everything we've built here. Shadow, the other animals, my entire team. This could destroy us all." Just then the phone rang again, shrill and insistent. Amelia froze. For a moment neither of them moved. On the third ring she picked up, hands trembling slightly. Windgate Animal Shelter. Dr. Carter speaking. On the other end, Marcus Ellison's voice was even more direct, edged with years of frustration and pain. Dr. Carter, I know you're afraid, but you need to understand. Shadow is not the monster everyone says he is. He's the reason I'm alive. I have proof. Medical records, photos, sworn statements from other officers. You can try to keep me out, but if you do, I'll go to every outlet that'll listen. You can't hide the truth forever. The silence in the office was suffocating. Amelia's mind raced, weighing consequences, her career, the future of the shelter, the weight of responsibility for every animal behind those walls. She glanced at Noah, as if searching for answers in the young man's worried eyes. Noah's jaw clenched. He could see the burden on her shoulders, but also the opportunity glimmering beneath the risk. Amelia spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. Mr. Ellison, you need to understand how precarious our situation is. I can't let you in right now. Not with the press swarming and the board breathing down my neck. Please, if you care about Shadow, let us handle this the right way. But Marcus would not be moved. You don't get it, Doc. The right way already failed him once. I won't let it happen again. I'm booking my flight now. You can try to block me, but the world's going to know the truth whether you help or not. He hung up before Amelia could respond, the finality of his decision ringing in the static. Noah exhaled, the knot in his stomach tightening into something sharper, almost electric. He could sense the ground shifting beneath them, rules bending, alliances forming in the shadows. The security guard poked his head in, oblivious to the drama unfolding, and mumbled something about patrol routes. Amelia nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. As soon as the guard was gone, she slumped into her chair, eyes brimming with anxiety. This is spiraling, Noah. If we lose control of the narrative, we could lose everything. Noah hesitated, then spoke with newfound conviction. Or maybe, for once, we don't try to control it. Maybe we just let the truth out and deal with the consequences, no matter what they are. If we don't fight for Shadow now, who will? He didn't wait for her answer. As soon as Amelia turned away, he slipped out into the hallway, resolve hardening into purpose. He pulled out his phone and sent a discreet text to Marcus. If you come, I'll get you in. Shadow deserves his day in the light. Back in his hotel room that night, Marcus Ellison sat on the edge of his bed, flight confirmation open on his phone. The pain of his broken family, the years spent haunted by betrayal and silence, seemed to crack open again. But beneath the scars, a flicker of hope pulsed. Maybe, at last, someone would listen. There are moments when a single act of courage can tip the scales of justice. As Marcus prepared to return to the past he'd never truly left, fate was already pulling the next thread. The apartment was dim, the low glow of Atlanta's streetlights filtering through blinds that hadn't been dusted in weeks. Marcus Ellison sat hunched at the battered kitchen table, half-shuttered by the silent, blinking lights of the city outside. His hands trembled as he sifted through a stack of documents, official military commendations, battered photographs, a discharged letter still creased where he'd crumpled it that first night, too angry and ashamed to read past the first line. The photo of Shadow, a proud German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a glossy coat, rested atop the pile, a silent accusation, a memory that refused to fade. The walls were bare but for the evidence of a life interrupted. A child's crayon drawing of a soldier and a dog. The colors faded. A calendar stuck on the month his world had caved in. Marcus looked older than his 38 years. Broad shoulders hunched, jaw flecked with a week's worth of stubble, eyes rimmed with fatigue that went deeper than sleepless nights. He pressed a hand to his forehead, as if he could push back the memory of those headlines. Decorated canine turns dangerous. Officer disgraced. The clock in the living room clicked past midnight. From down the hall came the soft, padding steps of Layla, his daughter, dragging her well-loved stuffed bunny by one floppy ear. She lingered in the doorway, hesitation written in the set of her small shoulders. "Daddy?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Can't sleep." Marcus forced a smile, beckoning her over. "Come here, sweetheart." He pulled her gently onto his lap, breathing in the sweet, familiar scent of her hair. For a moment, just holding her, he almost forgot how much had changed. Layla's gaze wandered to the photo of Shadow on the table, her expression solemn. "Is Shadow a bad dog?" she asked, her words cutting through him with the brutal honesty only a child could mutter. The kids at school said, they saw it on their parents' phones, they said he bites people. They said, you're not a hero anymore. A deep ache tightened Marcus's chest. He looked into her eyes, searching for the right words, but none came easily. "No, Layla, Shadow isn't a bad dog. And he faltered, swallowing the bitterness. Sometimes people believe what's easiest, not what's true." She looked unconvinced, confusion clouding her features. But why does everyone say so? Why did Mom cry when she saw the news? Her questions were daggers, reminders of all he'd lost, the camaraderie of his old unit, the trust of neighbors who now averted their gaze, the marriage that had unraveled under the relentless weight of suspicion and shame. The phone buzzed suddenly on the table, shattering the fragile silence. Denise's name flashed on the screen, his ex-wife, the one voice he both dreaded and needed. He answered, careful to keep his tone even. "Marcus!" Denise's voice was tired, brittle, the lines of exhaustion etched into every syllable. "Lay low again?" He glanced at his daughter, tucked against his chest. She had a nightmare. About Shadow. A heavy sigh. "She keeps asking questions I can't answer. Marcus, you know how hard this has been. The other parents, I know." His voice was raw, a knot forming in his throat. "I never meant for any of this. I never wanted." Denise cut him off gently. "It's not your fault. But it's not just about you anymore. I can't have Layla dragged into this. Not with the media, not with the looks at school. Maybe it's better if you wait a while before visiting." The words landed with the weight of a door closing. For a moment, Marcus couldn't breathe. He looked down at Layla, already drifting back to sleep in his arms. Her small hand curled trustingly into his shirt. Everything he'd once been, a respected officer, a husband, a father at the center of his family, now felt out of reach, lost in the avalanche that had followed that terrible day. He laid Layla gently in her bed, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. She murmured, "Will Shadow ever come home?" He had no answer. Instead, he returned to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, hands shaking. The documents on the table beckoned. He stared at the commendations, medals awarded for bravery in Afghanistan, for service above and beyond in the K-9 unit. Each citation referenced not just his actions, but Shadow's. The bond they'd forged in the chaos of war, in the split-second decisions where a dog's instincts meant the difference between life and death. He opened the old envelope again, the letter of termination. The accusations had been swift, the board's decision, final. He'd tried to fight it, but the system was rigged against him. A black officer in a department eager for a scapegoat. A town ready to blame the dog rather than look at the real story. He'd spent months drowning in appeals, only to find doors slammed in his face, old friends who no longer returned calls, and former comrades who mumbled excuses and turned away. Yet as he sifted through the files, one memory returned again and again. Shadow, leaping between him and a suspect with a gun. The flash of teeth and fur, the gunman's cry, the way Shadow had saved not just his life but the lives of others that night. None of that had made the news, only the botched arrest months later, the incident twisted by the media into something monstrous. A sudden wave of anger, hot, cleansing, rushed through him. He would not let this story end with defeat. He would not let Layla grow up believing her father and his partner were villains. Marcus squared his shoulders, resolve hardening. He pulled out his phone, opening the flight confirmation email. Tomorrow he would leave for Montana. He would face the ones who'd stolen his life, stolen Shadow's future, and demand the truth be seen. In the stillness, he whispered a promise to the empty room, the words more for himself than anyone else. "I'll bring justice for you, old friend, for both of us." He placed Shadow's photo in his bag, along with every file, every shred of evidence that might help him reclaim their name. He gazed once more at his sleeping daughter, his heart breaking with love and regret. This fight was not just for himself, or even for Shadow. It was for her, and for every family torn apart by a system too blind to see the truth. The city outside pulsed with restless neon life, but inside, Marcus's apartment, a quiet hope took root. Tomorrow, the journey for redemption would begin. As Marcus set his alarm and prepared for the road ahead, the wheels of fate were already turning. The truth, once buried, was about to claw its way into the light. The pale Montana sun had barely crested the horizon, painting long golden stripes across the frost-dusted fields as Marcus pulled up to the gates of Windgate Shelter. The gravel crunched beneath his boots, every step toward the building both familiar and surreal. He paused, taking in the chaotic scene. Protesters gathered with hastily scrawled signs. "Darren Jules, dogs don't belong here," while a few news vans and a handful of local live streamers jostled for position, their cameras aimed hungrily at the shelter's entrance. Inside, tension crackled in the air, as thick and oppressive as the winter chill outside. Dr. Amelia Carter stood rigid in the observation room, her face taut as she tracked the swelling crowd from behind reinforced glass. Noah Dalton hovered beside her, his jaw set and knuckles white against the manila folder he clutched. The shelter staff, already strained by the pressure, shuffled quietly between rooms, wary not just of the dog in quarantine, but of what the world might see and judge next. Shadow, the shepherd at the center of the storm, lay curled in the farthest corner of his isolated run, his breathing shallow, ears flat against his skull. For hours he had watched the parade of faces outside his cage, some curious, some angry, others simply afraid. The label, aggressive, hung on his door like a scarlet letter, condemning him in the eyes of the public before anyone bothered to ask why. Marcus signed the logbook with a trembling hand. The shelter's director, an anxious woman in a wrinkled blazer, greeted him at the door with a forced smile. "Mr. Ellison, I must remind you the press is here and the live streamers. Anything that happens, the whole world will see." There was no comfort in her voice, only the unspoken warning. One wrong move, and it's all over. For you, for us, and for that dog. As he was led down the stark hallway toward the special observation room, Marcus felt the stares of the staff burrowing into his back. Every step was heavy, with memory, dread, and something deeper, a hope so fragile it bordered on pain. He knew that this meeting, replayed for the internet to dissect and judge, would decide not just Shadow's fate, but perhaps his chance at redemption. A window separated Marcus from Shadow's enclosure. Cameras were already rolling, one held aloft by a college student with blue hair and a steady following on TikTok, another by a middle-aged blogger whispering updates to his smartphone. The room itself had become a stage. Shadow sensed movement and snapped to attention, lips pulling back in a low, warning growl. The shepherd's hackles bristled, body coiled tight with defensive energy. In the echo chamber of public scrutiny, even the smallest display could be twisted. Hero, villain, monster, martyr. Marcus's heart raced as he stepped into view, every muscle tense as he watched for a sign, any sign, of the dog he had once trusted with his life. Dr. Amelia's voice, brittle, cut through the silence. "You have 5 minutes. Please, be careful." At first, Shadow's eyes darted wildly, uncomprehending, armed only with Shadow, landing on Marcus as if he were just another stranger. For a breathless moment, the world seemed to pause. The protesters outside pressed closer to the glass, shouts muffled by the walls, but no less heated. "That's the man. He's the one from the news. The dog nearly killed someone. He's a menace." Marcus knelt, ignoring the taunts and the cold floor beneath him. He didn't look at the cameras. Instead, he spoke softly, voice trembling with all he had carried alone for too long. "Shadow, Delta, stand down." It was their old call sign, a command that once meant safety, a word that, for years, had carried them both through darkness and chaos. At first nothing happened. Then, in a gesture so subtle it nearly went unnoticed, Shadow's head cocked to one side, his gaze fixing on Marcus with something like recognition. He whimpered, a broken, guttural sound that shuddered through the room and left even the most hardened onlookers still. Marcus pressed his palm to the glass, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "It's okay, buddy. I'm here. I'm not leaving you." As if pulled by an invisible thread, Shadow inched closer, nostrils flaring, eyes locked on Marcus's face. For a moment his entire body trembled with the effort not to collapse. Then, with a heart-wrenching cry that cut through the cacophony, Shadow rose onto his haunches and lifted his paw in a slow, deliberate salute, the same gesture he had learned years ago, a sign of trust, of greeting, of loyalty unbroken by all the world's betrayal. The entire room froze. One of the live streamers gasped, camera wobbling as she instinctively reached for her face, overcome. The blogger's voice cracked. Are you seeing this?" The internet did not wait. The feed exploded, viewers sharing clips, replaying the moment again and again. Tears stung Marcus's eyes as he returned the gesture, palm pressed to the glass, his voice trembling. "Good boy. That's my good boy." Outside, the crowd was suddenly divided. Some wept, overcome by the raw emotion of reunion. Others yelled louder, furious at what they saw as an act, a manipulation, a trick. The livestream comments split, hashtags trending, "Free Shadow," "Justice for Marcus," "Protect our kids, hero or menace." In under an hour, the video of Shadow's salute and breakdown had gone viral, smashing 1 million views and sparking furious debate across the country. Dr. Amelia, her composure shattered, turned away, eyes glistening. Noah, still gripping the manila folder, whispered, "I knew there was more to this. I knew he wasn't what they said." Security urged Marcus to leave, as the protesters outside, seeing the moment play out in real time, grew louder and more chaotic. Some demanded Shadow's immediate release. Others called for him to be put down. The shelter's phone rang off the hook, national media now circling like wolves, demanding interviews, explanations, and accountability. But within the storm, for one sacred moment, only Marcus and Shadow mattered. The world's noise faded, replaced by the silent language they had once shared, a language of survival, loyalty, and hope. Marcus didn't know what tomorrow would bring. All he knew was that the bond between man and dog, nearly broken by injustice and fear, had survived. And as the world watched, divided and breathless, the fight for truth had only just begun. As the comments and calls poured in, the internet now a battlefield of opinion and outrage, a single fact became undeniable. The world had just witnessed something no one could ignore. And in the hours that followed, as the shelter braced for the next storm, the lines between friend and enemy, truth and rumor, justice and revenge would only grow more blurred. The tide had turned, but whose side would it flood? The world didn't so much watch as it erupted. Before dawn had turned to noon, the video of Shadow's trembling salute and Marcus's broken, teary greeting ricocheted from phone to phone, screen to screen. Hashtags bloomed like wildfires across every platform. Hero or threat, Windgate scandal, protect our kids. National news anchors played the footage on a relentless loop, their voices heavy with conflicting opinions, while social media swelled with a tidal wave of commentary, outrage, and heartbreak. Inside the Wingate shelter, the staff moved as if through a war zone. Emergency notifications blared on their phones. Do not respond to media. Do not open doors for anyone. Secure all animals. Police cars blocked off both ends of the narrow rural road. By midday, the county sheriff's deputies had ordered a temporary lockdown, patrols circling the building like a moat of blue lights. Protesters gathered behind barriers, their numbers swelling as news trucks unloaded, cameras swiveling for the perfect angle of conflict. For Marcus, the outside world had become a cacophony of voices, some supportive, some venomous, few willing to listen. One thread, repeated everywhere, called him a hero for standing by his dog, for refusing to let Shadow's story be written by fear and rumor. Yet the counter-chorus grew louder by the hour. Images of the dangerous shepherd, edited and replayed. Shadow's growl from moments of fear cropped to fuel the narrative of menace. Anonymous accounts spun wild stories about attacks that never happened, about Marcus training his dog to hate. In break rooms, in churches, in living rooms across America, arguments grew heated. News hosts framed the debate as a test of national values. Is this animal a hero, or has public sympathy gone too far? One conservative commentator railed, "If this is the new standard, are we supposed to excuse violence because we're told there's a sad backstory?" A prominent activist countered, "This isn't about a dog. It's about how we treat loyalty, trauma, and the truth." It didn't take long for the story to take a darker turn. That evening, Windgate's staff inboxes began filling with threats. A faceless account posted, "Set that dog loose and you'll pay." Another, "We know where your families live." Outside, protesters' chants grew uglier, their signs less about policy and more about vengeance. The local police issued a warning for all employees to remain on the premises, escorted those who needed to leave. Dr. Amelia Carter stared at her phone, her hands trembling. A local news site splashed her name and picture across their homepage with a poll, "Should the vet be fired?" Beneath the article, the comments devolved into personal attacks. Her competence, her background, even her appearance. The weight of it pressed down, a humiliation and danger she could neither confront nor escape. Noah Dalton, heart-pounding, watched the digital storm with a sick sense of awe. He saw that for every post defending Shadow, testimonies from retired canine handlers, a flood of photos of the shepherd as a decorated hero, there were twice as many twisting his story, turning empathy into ammunition. Screenshots of the old danger tag on Shadow's cage circulated as proof of an official warning. "Look, even the shelter admits it," someone posted, racking up thousands of shares. Noah tried to reply, tried to inject truth, but was drowned out by the din. But the brunt of the hate targeted Marcus himself. The algorithms, always hungry, found an old army photo, Marcus and Shadow, medals gleaming, and paired it with a tabloid headline, "From Hero to Pariah." Comments poured in, some calling him the last decent man, others an irresponsible, dangerous threat. Then, the attacks turned explicitly racial. Memes mocked his skin. Anonymous messages called him every slur in the book. Wild rumors spread about his criminal past. The injustice felt suffocating. Marcus had faced combat zones, but nothing prepared him for the faceless malice of a nation at war with itself. Even Layla, Marcus's daughter, was not spared. A private message appeared in Marcus's phone inbox late that night, from an account with a wolf avatar. "Cute kid you've got. Hope nothing happens to her." For a moment the world spun. Marcus's heart slammed in his chest, his hand shaking so violently that he dropped the phone. The police, when told, promised to investigate, but their voices were tired, overburdened. "We're getting a lot of this lately, sir. Stay safe. Keep your daughter close." Within the shelter, fear and exhaustion bled into every conversation. Some staff broke down in tears, unable to bear the avalanche of hate. Others raged at the injustice. One night shift worker quit on the spot, whispering, "This isn't what I signed up for." Meanwhile, outside, the battle lines had hardened. Some protesters draped their cars in flags and chanted Shadow's name. Others hurled slurs and demanded justice for the victims. No one could say who the victim was anymore. Inside the shelter's cramped admin office, Dr. Amelia Carter gathered her team for an emergency meeting. Her eyes, red-rimmed but clear, swept across the faces of her exhausted staff. "We can't let the outside world decide the truth for us," she said, voice steady despite the panic. "We owe it to Shadow and to each other to keep fighting. But we need a plan. We need to stay together." She turned to Marcus, who stood silent, his phone still shaking in his hand. "We can't give up now. If you need protection for your family, say so. But we need your story. We need the truth." Noah added, quietly but fiercely, "I've started compiling all the real evidence, the security videos, the K9 records. We can build a case." But Amelia shook her head. "It won't matter unless the public believes us. We're fighting a narrative, not just a legal case. And the narrative out there is burning out of control." Marcus, jaw clenched, finally spoke. "I'm not leaving Shadow, and I won't let them scare me into silence." He looked around at the tired, frightened faces. "But this is bigger than just one dog. This is about justice, for all of us." Outside, the crowd's roar rose and fell, a relentless, angry tide. The shelter's windows rattled. Somewhere a firework exploded, sending startled animals into a frenzy. On Twitter, justice for Shadow had rocketed to the #1 trending spot, but so had its hateful twin, "Put him down." Inside, the storm seemed poised to break the fragile shell of hope that kept them going. But as Amelia began outlining the next steps, security plans, patience, legal contacts, Marcus caught Noah's eye, nodding silently. Whatever came next, they would not face it alone. Yet as the meeting broke up and everyone filed out, Marcus lingered by the window, staring into the night. His phone vibrated again. This time, the message was a photo. Layla's school, shot from the street, with a single line, "Keep your mouth shut." Marcus's knuckles whitened as he stared at the screen. There was no way back now. As dawn approached, the shelter was no longer just a place for animals. It had become ground zero in a national reckoning, where every word and every choice would shape not just one dog's fate, but the conscience of a country. The heavy gray morning outside Windgate Shelter was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside. The overnight media inferno had mutated, no longer just about Shadow or Marcus, but about the soul of the town, the reliability of the press, and the trustworthiness of anyone who dared stand in the eye of this hurricane. In the cramped meeting room, under the flickering fluorescent lights, Dr. Amelia Carter gathered her team around a battered old conference table, stacks of documents and phones pinging non-stop with the latest headlines and threats. Noah, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, scrolled through the trending tags and incoming emails, his face growing paler by the minute. "They're running with it. Everywhere," he muttered, showing Amelia a tablet screen covered in headline. Marcus sat in a corner, arms folded tight across his chest, jaw clenched as he stared at the battered file folder in front of him, one that should have cleared Shadow's name but now felt like dead weight. The shelter's director, Mr. Rayner, entered, phone pressed tight to his ear, expression grim. He spoke in sharp, anxious whispers to someone at the other end, clearly corporate, clearly afraid. He didn't sit. "This is spiraling," he said, barely above a whisper. "Sponsors are threatening to pull out. If we don't act soon, Windgate will be the next casualty." Before anyone could respond, the shelter's front phone rang with a shrill, urgent note. A young receptionist, voice trembling, called out, "It's Channel 7. They want a live comment from Dr. Carter right now." Simultaneously, a group of local reporters began gathering outside the locked lobby doors, pressing against the glass, their cameras and microphones like a wall of judgment. But the real bombshell dropped only moments later. An alert sounded on every staffer's phone, a push notification from the state's largest newspaper. Ex-K9 handler accused of orchestrating hoax. Shadow's bite was deadly, says leaked report. The article, long and full of innuendo, painted Marcus as a disgraced veteran clinging to the myth of a hero dog to salvage his reputation. It alleged, through unnamed sources and heavily redacted files, that Shadow had not only bitten, but killed a civilian in the line of duty, and that the supposed attack was an attempt to defend Marcus from a charge of domestic violence. A photograph ran beneath the headline, Shadow's muzzle, teeth bared, frozen in a snarl. The caption read, "Once a hero, now a threat." The community group that had protested outside the shelter pounced on the story, waving printouts and chanting, "No more lies, no more lies." The narrative was cementing itself in the public's mind with the precision and speed of a viral infection. Marcus felt the oxygen vanish from the room. "That's a lie," he managed through gritted teeth, but the words sounded weak, even to him. Dr. Amelia raised a hand, trying to steady the team, but even her voice wavered. "We know the truth, but we're not the ones writing these headlines. The world outside only sees what they're told to see." The drama outside had ignited another wildfire. At a local community center, activists from the Black Veterans Coalition and local churches met, voices raised in angry debate. Some demanded justice for Marcus and Shadow, seeing in them a mirror of their struggle against a justice system that never truly listened. Others, scarred by years of betrayal and broken promises, worried that standing by Marcus could backfire, could bring more violence to their doorsteps. At the same time, national organizations representing canine handlers and veterans issued cautious press releases, one side expressing concern about the dangerous precedent of shielding violent animals, the other reminding the world that no one knows loyalty and sacrifice better than a war dog. The drama boiled over at the shelter as a new face appeared at the entrance. Megan Rowe, a sharp-eyed, fiercely independent investigative journalist, known for chasing stories others wouldn't touch. She wore a battered leather satchel and a look of calm determination, nodding politely at the protesters as she slipped inside, credentials flashing. Within minutes, she was ushered into the shelter's back room, face to face with Marcus and the exhausted team. Megan didn't waste time. "I've been following your case for weeks," she said, her voice low but resolute. "This doesn't add up. I've seen 3 versions of the so-called attack video. All of them are edited, not just cut for time, cut to hide something." She pulled out a slim drive and pushed it across the table. "I got this from an insider at the media company that broke the story. If I'm right, it proves someone's tampering with evidence." The room fell silent as Megan clicked her laptop open and played the file. On screen, the familiar scene unfolded. Shadow, tethered and nervous, an unidentified man screaming just out of frame. The official video, as aired, jumped at the moment of violence, skipping seconds, showing only the dog lunging and chaos. But in Megan's file, those lost seconds returned, frames showing the man brandishing something metallic, a flash of aggression toward Marcus, and Shadow moving to intercept. It was an act of protection, not unprovoked violence. Noah swore softly, relief and rage fighting for dominance. "They cut the part where Shadow was defending you, where he was trying to protect." Amelia slumped in her chair, the weight of months of lies and fear almost too much to bear. But Marcus, watching his old partner on the screen, saw something deeper, a calculated effort to erase context, to warp the truth into something unrecognizable. "Someone wants us destroyed," he said quietly. "Not just me and Shadow, anyone who stands up for the truth." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Amelia's phone buzzed again. An email from her boss. "Keep your mouth shut or start looking for another job." The shelter's director, sweating, whispered, "If this blows up, Windgate's done." Megan looked at each of them in turn. "I want to help. But if we're going to beat this, you have to let me tell the story, not just with a press release. With everything, documents, interviews, uncut footage. You'll have to trust me. Outside, the protesters' voices mingled with chants from a new group arriving, supporters of Marcus, waving signs for justice, demanding an end to the lies. The parking lot was a battle line, drawn not just through a shelter, but through the conscience of a town. As the meeting ended, Megan leaned in close to Marcus, whispering, "This isn't just a smear campaign. There's money, politics, and power behind this. Someone with real influence wants you and Shadow erased." Marcus's eyes narrowed with determination. "Then let's bring them into the light." As Megan's video finished playing, the truth glimmered, obscured by lies but not gone. In that moment, a question settled over the shelter like a challenge. Who was pulling the strings behind the curtain of this crisis? The neon open sign flickered in the window of a nearly deserted Montana cafe, casting ghostly blue shadows onto the rain-speckled sidewalk. Marcus sat in a back booth with Megan Rowe, the investigative reporter, both nursing cups of bitter coffee that had long since gone cold. The world outside was asleep, but inside the air buzzed with anxiety and the sense that something was unraveling, something bigger and darker than anyone had guessed. Marcus glanced at the clock above the counter, 2:12 in the 48 hours, his mind looping through headlines, notes of threats, and the image of Shadow cowering in his cage. Megan scrolled her phone with swift, practiced motions, fielding messages from contacts on both coasts. Her journalistic instincts were sharp, but even she looked rattled. "Noah's late," Marcus said, voice low, eyes darting to the entrance as if expecting a familiar face. "Or trouble." Megan didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on an encrypted chat window glowing on her phone. "He's fine," she said finally. "But someone's watching him. He thinks he's being followed. He called from a burner." She slid the phone across the table, showing Marcus a string of messages. "Parked 2 blocks away. Black SUV. Took photos. I'm heading home. Another route." Marcus felt a familiar pulse of dread. "They know we're digging. Who are these people, Megan? This isn't just about a shelter scandal anymore." Megan took a shaky breath, then leaned in, lowering her voice to a whisper barely above the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. "I started looking for patterns after your reunion with Shadow went viral. Marcus, Shadow isn't the only dog who's been labeled dangerous in the last year. There's a string of cases, mostly K9S, all ex-military or police, all suddenly turned from heroes to outcasts." She scrolled to a digital dossier. Dozens of names, photos, short bios. Every one of these dogs had a handler who either challenged local law enforcement, spoke up about abuse in the system, or got in the way of someone powerful. And almost all the records? Tampered with, videos edited, reports lost. Most of these animals were retired to shelters, then quietly disappeared. Marcus's throat tightened. Disappeared? The word left a bitter taste. "You think someone's targeting these dogs? And their handlers?" "Not just targeting. Erasing." Megan's eyes were hard with conviction. "There's money in it, Marcus. I think someone's running a black market for retired K9S. The ones that don't comply or might talk get labeled a threat. The rest gets shipped off to private security, or worse." Thunder rumbled outside, as if to underscore the danger. Marcus felt a chill settle over his skin, the pieces falling into place with terrifying clarity. "And Shadow?" he asked. "Why him?" Megan locked eyes with him, her words slow and careful. "Because Shadow's case went sideways. He bit a man who was trying to attack you. Someone in the local DA's office cut the footage and spun a new narrative, one that painted Shadow as a monster and you as an irresponsible handler. If that lie held, nobody would look twice when Shadow vanished. But you didn't play along. You kept fighting." At that moment, Megan's phone pinged with an encrypted notification. Anonymous user wants to share a file. She clicked it open, then pushed the device into Marcus's hands, heart pounding. This is from someone who calls himself Foxhound, claims to have hacked into the state evidence locker. Marcus watched as a raw, unedited video began to play. The scene was all too familiar. The disputed day, the warehouse lot, the suspect approaching Marcus, a glint of steel in his hand. Shadow lunged only after the man attacked, intercepting the blow and saving Marcus's life. There was no gratuitous violence, only duty and loyalty, followed by chaos as backup arrived. The date and time stamp matched the incident on record, except this footage had never seen the light of day. Megan's hands trembled as she watched. This proves everything. Shadow wasn't out of control. He was doing his job, and and someone went to a lot of trouble to hide that fact. Marcus felt an overwhelming wave of vindication and fury, followed by a deep, gnawing fear. If they're willing to falsify evidence and threaten witnesses, they won't just back down because we know the truth. As the cafe's front bell jingled, Megan quickly closed the file, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of eavesdroppers. But it was only a weary trucker ordering pie to go. Still, the sense of being hunted never left. Noah's voice crackled on the phone, the sound of his breathing quick and tense. "Marcus, they were outside my place tonight. I heard someone tapping on my window. When I turned the lights on, they'd spray-painted 'Stay Quiet' on my car. I don't know what to do. I'm scared, man, scared." Megan put the call on speaker so Marcus could respond. "Noah, listen to me. Don't go home tonight. I'll send you the number for a safe motel. Lay low. Stay off your usual routes. Don't talk to anyone you don't trust. We're going to get through this, but you have to be careful." Noah's answer was shaky. "If something happens to me, make sure people see that video. Promise me." Marcus's gut twisted, knowing the danger was now far beyond professional. This was personal, lethal, and real. Megan's phone vibrated again. This time, another anonymous tip. "Your next move will decide if Shadow lives. Stop now or the dog disappears for good." The message was signed only with a wolf emoji. For a moment, neither Megan nor Marcus spoke. The world outside the cafe felt suddenly colder, more dangerous, the darkness pressing in at every window. "We can't back down now," Megan said, determination sharpening her voice. "If they want a war of truth, let's give them one." Marcus nodded, jaw set, the memory of Shadow's loyalty burning in his chest like a shield. "We'll fight. For Shadow. For every dog erased by these cowards. For the truth." But as the cafe's clock ticked closer to dawn, they both understood. The next move would come at a price, and the people hunting them had no intention of letting the past stay buried. The threats were no longer subtle. With Noah forced into hiding, and Marcus facing the first taste of direct intimidation, the danger was no longer just a shadow on the wall. Now the hunter and the hunted were face to face, and the battle for truth had only just begun. It was just past 4:30 a.m. when the air around Windgate Shelter began to crackle with an energy far more sinister than the usual Montana chill. The shelter was supposed to be a haven, its chain-linked fences gleaming with dew, floodlights humming low, only the distant echo of coyotes to break the silence. But that morning the threat didn't come from the wilds outside. It crept in with purpose. Cloaked in shadows cast by men, Marcus had barely managed a couple of hours' sleep, his body slumped in a borrowed cot inside the main office. His mind replayed the warnings from Megan and the chilling call from Noah. The darkness wasn't just closing in, it was knocking on the door. As if on cue, a low, guttural growl rumbled from the kennels, a sound so deep and sharp it pierced through walls and into Marcus's chest. He was up instantly, adrenaline flooding his veins, instinct overriding exhaustion. Shadow was the first to sense the danger. The German Shepherd's body, tense with primal alertness, paced back and forth in his reinforced enclosure. The other shelter dogs responded with anxious yelps and whimpers, but Shadow's bark was different, urgent, deliberate, a warning forged in countless nights on patrol. Noah, who'd volunteered for the graveyard shift despite the threats, was in the hallway, clutching a heavy flashlight, nerves raw and ready to snap. Suddenly, the exterior lights flickered, then died, plunging the shelter into darkness. Noah swore under his breath and ran to check the breakers, but before he could move 2 steps, the sound of shattering glass erupted at the far end of the building. 4 men in black ski masks and tactical gloves slipped through the breach, moving with the cold efficiency of those who'd done this before. The glint of metal in their hands, pipes, stun batons, a crowbar, left no room for doubt. Marcus dashed to the control room, frantically checking the live feed on the security monitors. The screens showed figures creeping past the kennels, one pointing directly at Shadow's cage. The German Shepherd erupted, hurling his weight against the bars, barking so ferociously the glass vibrated. Amelia, woken by the alarm, stumbled into the room, her face blanched with fear and disbelief. "We need to call the cops, now!" she shouted, reaching for her phone. But Marcus was already ahead of her. "Get everyone out of here," he barked. "Noah, take the side exit with the staff. I'll hold them off." But the attackers were faster than anyone had expected. One kicked open the door to the kennel block, sending splinters flying. Their leader, a hulking man with a snake tattoo curling up his forearm, gestured sharply at Shadow's cage. "That's the one. Grab the mutt. If anyone gets in your way, deal with them." Shadow's entire being radiated fury and defiance. He didn't cower or hide. As one masked man fumbled with a set of bolt cutters, Shadow slammed his body into the door, teeth bared, snarling so viciously that the intruder recoiled, dropping his tools. It was enough for Marcus, who had grabbed a heavy broom handle and slipped into the hall to buy precious seconds. "Back off!" Marcus roared, but the men only laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. The leader lunged at Marcus, the two colliding with a crash that sent Marcus sprawling, the wind knocked out of him. Another attacker yanked open a nearby kennel, inadvertently freeing a terrified terrier, which darted between their legs and disappeared into the chaos. As the commotion grew, one of the men turned on Amelia, who had come to help, shoving her hard against a row of cabinets. But Shadow, with a superhuman burst of energy, twisted his jaws around the edge of his gate, wrenching the lock just enough to slip through. He streaked out, a streak of black and tan, barreling straight for Amelia's attacker. With a savage bark, Shadow clamped onto the man's arm, dragging him away before letting go and herding Amelia back toward safety. Noah, hearing the fight, doubled back and swung his flashlight into the nearest attacker's face. The man dropped his baton, howling, as Marcus got back on his feet and helped drag both Noah and Amelia into the storage closet. "Barricade the door!" Noah yelled, pushing a heavy cabinet against it as fists hammered from the other side. Through the melee, Shadow didn't retreat. He positioned himself between his people and the assailants, hackles raised, eyes wild with protectiveness. One man swung a pipe, catching Shadow on the flank, but the shepherd refused to yield, launching himself again and again at the attackers, refusing to let them pass. The fight reached a fever pitch, the howls of animals mingling with shouts and curses. One man tried to grab a second dog as leverage, but Shadow tackled him, pinning him to the ground long enough for Amelia to drag the injured staffer out of the way. And then, sirens. Floodlights snapped back on, and blue and red strobes danced across the windows as 3 police cars screeched to a halt outside. The attackers scrambled, one smashing open a back window, another leaping over the fence, 2 more disappearing into the brush beyond the shelter's perimeter. Within seconds they were gone, leaving only chaos, broken glass, and the metallic taste of fear. Marcus cradled Shadow's bruised side, voice trembling. "You saved us. You saved everyone." Shadow, panting and bleeding, licked Marcus's hand, gaze unwavering, as if to say that loyalty, true loyalty, never needed words. Within minutes, the shelter was swarming with officers, EMTs, and journalists who'd caught wind of the commotion. Amelia gave her statement, hands shaking, while Noah replayed the security footage for the first arriving detectives. The video showed everything: how the men had gone straight for Shadow, how the shepherd had fought to protect the staff, how one blow could have killed an innocent worker had Shadow not intervened. But the attackers had vanished without a trace. The police dusted for prints, took statements, and left with little to show for it except the certainty that this was no random act. Someone wanted Shadow gone, and was willing to spill blood to make it happen. By sunrise, the shelter was cordoned off, caution tape flapping in the early morning breeze, and every major network had picked up the story. For every person still calling for Shadow's destruction, a dozen more now asked the real question: who was behind the attempt on his life? And why was this dog so dangerous to the people in power? As a shell-shocked staff and battered Shadow watched the sun rise over Windgate, Marcus knew the nightmare was just beginning. The fluorescent lights of the Windgate Police Department buzzed with a harsh, artificial glow, washing the interrogation room in an icy palette of grays and pale blues. Marcus sat at the metal table, hands folded, the fatigue of a sleepless night etched into the lines of his face. Megan Rowe, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, set a flash drive down between them with quiet deliberation. On the other side, Sheriff Devin Holt leaned back, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral as he sized up the 2 visitors. Shadow, bandaged but alert, waited just outside the door with an officer assigned to watch him, his presence a living reminder that something about this case was dangerously out of the ordinary. Megan took the lead, her voice steady but urgent. "Sheriff Holt, this drive contains unedited security footage from last night's attack. It proves those men broke in specifically to take Shadow. You'll also see footage of previous incidents, a pattern of intimidation, threats, and, frankly, A criminal conspiracy. Devin Holt made a show of inspecting the drive before sliding it, untouched, to the far end of the table. I appreciate your concern, Ms. Rowe, Mr. Ellison, but I have protocols. It's not up to me to decide what's real or what's not, until my department's forensics team reviews the evidence. Meanwhile, I strongly urge you both to stay out of the way and stop stirring up panic in our community. Marcus felt the blood rising in his face. Sheriff, people almost died last night. Someone tried to kill my dog. They tried to kill me. And now you're telling me you're not interested in a clear video record of what happened? Holt's lips curled into something close to a smile, but there was no warmth in it. What I'm telling you is that you need to let law enforcement do its job, Mr. Ellison. You and your supporters are inflaming an already tense situation. I don't want to see you arrested for obstruction or incitement. The threat hung in the air, poisonous and unmistakable. Megan exchanged a glance with Marcus. They had come seeking justice and protection. Instead, they found the door to official help slammed in their faces. As Megan packed up her laptop, she whispered, "I know that name. Holt. He used to work canine import and export over in Jefferson County. There were rumors years ago about lost dogs, falsified euthanasia records, even bribes. He left just before the grand jury inquiry. I can dig deeper." Marcus nodded grimly, every instinct as a veteran and a father screaming that the danger was far from over. "We're on our own," he muttered. "He's not just stonewalling us. He's hiding something." Minutes later, outside the station, Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Denise. Panic seeping from every word. "Layla's missing. She never came to school. Call me, now." A primal coldness seized Marcus as he broke into a sprint. Shadow sensed the urgency, straining at the leash, barking in frantic agreement. Megan threw herself into the driver's seat of her battered Subaru and tore off toward the Ellison house. Marcus calling every contact he had, Denise's voice cracking over the phone as she described what little she knew. A black van, Layla's abandoned backpack, no one noticing until the teacher called home. But it wasn't over. As Megan turned onto Layla's street, they spotted the van, idling at the curb, back doors half open. Without waiting for instructions, Shadow leaped from the car, a streak of muscle and righteous fury. A masked man dragged Layla, limp and sobbing, toward the van. But Shadow slammed into him with such force the man collapsed, howling as his arm bent at an unnatural angle. The other would-be abductor, startled by the commotion, tried to swing at Shadow with a tire iron, but the shepherd dodged and lunged again, picking the weapon aside. Megan grabbed Layla, scooping her up as Marcus arrived, breathless and wild-eyed, pulling them all to safety. Sirens howled in the distance, but by the time police arrived, the attackers had melted into the early morning fog, leaving behind only chaos and a girl clinging desperately to her father's neck, her sobs muffled in his shirt. The story exploded across every platform within the hour. The rescue, captured on a neighbor's doorbell camera and shared by Megan, went viral. Within minutes, millions had watched as Shadow intervened with the speed and precision of a hero. On Twitter, hashtags trended worldwide. "Shadow the hero, dog, justice for Layla, and expose the corrupt." Each one a rallying cry against the ugly underbelly of injustice now laid bare. But with the fame came risk. Anonymous messages, some supportive, many threatening, flooded Marcus's inbox. The lines between friend and enemy blurred as old acquaintances surfaced, some to offer help, others to warn him off. The local news ran side-by-side interviews. On one screen, Layla's tearful recounting of her rescue. On the other, Sheriff Holt's stern denial of any police misconduct. Megan, meanwhile, dove into digital archives, pulling up every article, court record, and budget report she could find about Holt's years in Jefferson County. Patterns emerged, patterns of dogs disappearing from evidence rooms, sudden spikes in private security contracts, and the same shell companies appearing on both sides of every deal. Shadow wasn't just a scapegoat, he was a living witness, a piece of evidence too dangerous for those in power to leave alive. And now the public saw it too. Marcus, finally done waiting for help that would never come, uploaded every file, every unedited video, every medical report and threat to a public drive, posting the link everywhere. "If anything happens to us," he wrote, "the truth will be out there forever. We will not be silenced." The response was electric. Tens of thousands pledged support, offering legal aid, protection, and investigative muscle. Civil rights organizations called for an independent federal probe, Animal welfare activists demanded shelter reform and justice for Shadow. For the first time, the Wingate story wasn't just about a dog or a soldier. It had become a national symbol of resistance against systemic corruption, racial bias, and the abuse of power. Yet, beneath the swelling hope, a new anxiety pulsed. Marcus knew too well that in America, the most dangerous step was turning truth into justice. As the family gathered in the safety of Megan's living room that night, Layla curled beside Shadow, Denise on speakerphone, Noah watching the doors. Marcus's resolve hardened. He whispered, "We're not alone anymore. Now they'll have to answer to everyone." Marcus Hayes had spent the previous 48 hours living on caffeine, adrenaline, and the constant thrum of nerves, but nothing had truly prepared him for the storm that awaited at the FBI's Denver headquarters. The sleek, glass-walled lobby buzzed with tension. A tangle of federal agents in Navy windbreakers, uniformed officers, reporters clutching notepads, and clusters of camera crews blocked every entrance. The American flag flapped heavily outside against a wind that had blown Marcus's life off course months ago, and the headlines inside now seemed to follow him wherever he went. At the center of it all, an aging German shepherd named Shadow, tail tucked low, nose pressed to the side of his travel crate, peering out with cautious eyes that still held a flicker of hope. Shadow's case had become national news overnight. Talk show hosts argued about justice for service animals. Social media boiled with hashtags. Justice for Shadow. Dogs deserve better. Public safety first, fueling a storm that showed no sign of slowing. The federal government had been forced to act. The local authorities in Montana were deemed compromised after leaks proved their mishandling. And now Marcus was officially part of a federal inquiry into not just Shadow's fate, but into systemic abuses and hidden scandals stretching back years. Riley Boone, the young special agent assigned to Marcus's case, greeted him outside the secure elevator. Boone's handshake was firm, eyes keen, but Marcus detected in his bearing a subtle undercurrent of kinship, a look shared by men who had seen war and understood its scars, both visible and invisible. Shadow, sensing something different, let out a quiet chuff and pressed closer to Marcus's side. Inside the windowless, state-of-the-art interview room, Marcus sat at a steel table, Shadow's leash wrapped tightly around his wrist. The questioning began the moment the door clicked shut. Federal prosecutors, an attorney for the Canine Veterans Association, and a rotating cast of agents peppered Marcus with inquiries. Why had he defied local authorities? What did he know of the missing evidence? Was he in contact with other handlers whose K9S had also been retired under suspicious circumstances? All the while, the cameras outside continued their unrelenting watch, broadcasting his every move to a nation already split by outrage and suspicion. Meanwhile, a parallel drama unfolded in the building's press auditorium, where Boone fielded questions from a wall of journalists, their voices sharp and loaded. Some wanted to know if the government would ensure justice for Shadow, hailing him as a hero. Others, stoking old fires, argued for stricter controls on all working dogs, demanding that every canine tied to any violent incident be permanently removed from service, and, some implied, from public memory altogether. Boone's every word was scrutinized, his measured answers spun and clipped into viral soundbites within minutes. The country's wound was raw, and the battle lines ran straight through this federal building. Through it all, Marcus clung to composure, but the strain was undeniable. He'd expected pressure, maybe even intimidation, but not the sense of being boxed in by the very people who claimed to seek the truth. At midday, after hours of questioning, his senior agent led him aside, his expression somber. "For your protection, and to preserve the chain of evidence, we'll need Shadow to remain in our care until the investigation concludes. It's non-negotiable." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Marcus refused. At first, his voice steady, eyes burning, but the threat was implicit. Refuse and risk obstruction charges, or worse. The law that had once been his shield was now a cage. Shadow's fate, it seemed, was no longer just about one dog, or one soldier, or even one town in Montana. It was a question of national identity, of how America treated those who served and those discarded by a broken system. In the hallway outside, protesters from rival advocacy groups squared off, one side waving signs painted with paw prints and "Service, not scapegoats," the other holding up photos of victims from canine incidents, their chants echoing with fear and anger. Security escorted Marcus and Shadow through a gauntlet of flashbulbs, jeers, and applause, each step more surreal than the last. Amid this chaos, Marcus was drawn aside by Boone. The young agent, voice low and words precise, confessed that he'd found evidence of tampering, entire swaths of Shadow's military record missing from official databases, and encrypted communications between unnamed officials suggesting a coordinated effort to erase Shadow's heroics and obscure the details of his retirement. "Someone with a lot of power wants this buried," Boone whispered. "And not just your dog. There's a pattern here. Shadow isn't the first." Marcus's stomach tightened. He'd spent months fighting for a voice, only to realize he was up against a machine designed to silence dissent and manufacture consent. Boone proposed a partnership, off the record. The two men would share what they knew, pool their resources, and investigate the network working to destroy not just Shadow, but countless others like him. It was risky, dangerous, and Marcus knew that one misstep could ruin them both. But for the first time since the storm began, hope flickered. "They want you to give up," Boone said, "but I say we fight smarter." Outside, as the sun dipped behind the Rockies, the national news led with grainy footage of Shadow, once a hero, now a controversy. Talk radio bristled with angry callers. Anonymous threats flooded Marcus's phone. But in the quietest moments, when he looked into Shadow's eyes and saw trust, shaken, but unbroken, he understood that their story wasn't finished. It was only just beginning. As night fell on Denver and federal agents conferred behind closed doors, Marcus quietly met Boone in the shadows of the parking garage, ready to form an alliance that would take them deeper into the heart of a conspiracy neither had imagined. If the world wanted the truth, he would risk everything to deliver it. And as Marcus and Boone slipped out into the darkness, one soldier, one agent, and a battered German shepherd, they knew that the real fight for justice had only just begun. The hour was far past midnight when Boone led Marcus through the side entrance of an aging apartment building on the city's edge, the sort of anonymous block that saw a steady churn of tenants and never drew attention. The city beyond was electric with protest and rumor, but inside the small, low-lit unit, silence settled heavy, punctuated only by the click of Shadow's nails against the scuffed linoleum floor. Marcus's nerves were raw, but he trusted Boone enough to follow. In this world, trust was a rare and dangerous currency. Boone's apartment was a study in paranoia and survival. Blackout curtains, signal jammers, laptops stacked atop each other, and a haphazard array of takeout cartons. Shadow made a slow circuit of the room, sniffing corners, hackles only half lowered. At the dining table sat a wiry young man with sunken eyes and fingers that never stopped moving. Lucas, Boone's insurance policy. A former Army communications specialist whose discharge papers bore the marks of institutional betrayal. Marcus recognized the haunted look. It was the same one that stared back from his bathroom mirror every morning. Boone locked the door behind them and got straight to business, voice pitched low, urgency pulsing in every word. "I didn't bring you here for small talk. We don't have time. Lucas, show him." Lucas barely glanced up, already typing. "I started digging the day your case hit the wire. Too many K9s retired after controversial missions. Some vanished. Some were found dead. They all had one thing in common. Each was scheduled as a witness for courts-martial or internal investigations. Your dog's on the same list." He tapped a folder open. Rows of names, photos, files half redacted and corrupted by administrative error. Marcus felt the room close in, the weight of decades of loyalty turning to sand in his hands. He tried to speak, but Lucas cut him off. "I recovered part of Shadow's original deployment file. There's a kill order from a private military contractor, time-stamped just days after that incident in Montana. Not just Shadow. They're erasing witnesses, canine and human, who could implicate the wrong people." The floor seemed to tilt. Marcus's entire career, every oath he'd sworn, all suddenly felt like a house built on quicksand. "Who's behind this?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Boone answered, his voice tight. "That's what we're still chasing. But it goes deep. There's money, contracts, politicians with dirty hands, and someone inside federal law enforcement is feeding them information." Lucas's screens flickered. "Someone's probing our network right now. We need to get offline. Now." In seconds, the apartment dissolved into chaos. Boone swept laptops into a duffel. Marcus grabbed Shadow's leash. From the hallway, boots thundered on linoleum, shouts rising. "FBI! Open up!" Lucas's face went white. "It's not them," he hissed. "Get to the fire escape." They burst through the window just as the front door exploded inward. Shadow leapt first, Marcus following, half stumbling down the iron steps as a squad of armed men, faces masked, movements practiced, poured into the apartment behind them. Shots cracked, glass rained down, and for one wild second, Marcus thought they wouldn't make it, but Shadow's bark, sharp, commanding, snapped him back to reality. He ducked, sprinted for the alley, Boone and Lucas on his heels. The city's night air stung his wounded shoulder. A bullet had grazed him in the chaos. Lucas shoved a car key into his palm, the group piling into an unmarked sedan and tearing off into the dark. In the rear view, flames licked up the side of Boone's apartment. The message was unmistakable. There would be no hiding, not for any of them. The car was thick with fear and adrenaline. Shadow pressed close to Marcus, his muzzle nudging Marcus's hand with silent reassurance, even as blood stained the soldier's sleeve. "We were compromised," Boone said, voice shaking now that the immediate threat had passed. "Somebody in the bureau is working for the other side. They wanted us dead." Lucas's hands never stopped moving, tapping at his phone even as they careened through Denver's empty industrial streets. "I got something before we ran," he muttered. "Another file, codenamed Echo. There's a K9, female, Belgian Malinois, locked up at a research camp north of here. She's supposed to testify in a trial about illegal contract killings. They're planning to retire her tomorrow." The word retire now sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He looked at Boone, whose jaw was set in grim resolve. "If they'll kill for a cover-up, they'll do anything. We can't let another one disappear." Boone glanced at Marcus in the rear view. "You're hurt. You should find somewhere safe. Call your family." But Marcus shook his head. "If I run now, it's all for nothing. We fight, or Shadow and every dog like him gets erased." They reached the city's edge before dawn. Finding shelter in an abandoned warehouse where Lucas could patch Marcus's wound and reroute their communications through burner phones, Shadow paced the perimeter, every muscle tense, as if he sensed that the danger wasn't over. Outside, the world moved on, cars commuting, news anchors speculating. But inside the warehouse, it was a war for the truth, with no guarantee of survival. As first light filtered through dirty skylights, Marcus watched Shadow settle beside him, brown eyes alert, every sense attuned to threats only a canine could feel. They were alone against a machine, but the alliance they'd formed tonight, with Boone, Lucas, and the battered loyalty of a dog who refused to break, felt like the last, best hope for justice. They had uncovered a conspiracy, but now the hunters had become the hunted, and with one more canine's life on the line, Marcus knew there could be no turning back. The wind off the plains had an icy bite, sharp enough to cut through even the layers of tactical gear as Marcus crouched in the shadows outside the perimeter fence. The research facility in Wyoming didn't look like much from the road. A long, low concrete structure behind layers of barbed wire, floodlights sweeping methodically across the snow-patched fields. But Marcus knew better than to be fooled by appearances. Inside, secrets were buried deeper than the winter frost. Beside him, Boone adjusted the night vision scope on his rifle, while Lucas flicked through blueprints on his tablet, his fingers trembling with adrenaline. In the darkness at their feet, Shadow waited with that eerie, preternatural stillness only a canine could muster. Muscles taut, ears flicking to every distant sound, eyes shining with the memory of every night raid he'd survived. Tonight, they weren't the only ones running out of time. Boone's voice crackled in Marcus's earpiece, low and terse. "Guards change in 3 minutes. We slip in behind the north warehouse. Then Lucas jams the alarms. We find Echo, grab the files and get out. No heroics, no noise." Marcus nodded, though every instinct in his body knew it would never be that simple. Shadow nudged his gloved hand, and Marcus let out a breath. He'd trusted this dog with his life in places the world would never see. Tonight, that bond would be tested again. "Ready?" Boone whispered. "Let's do it," Marcus replied, voice steady. They moved like ghosts, sliding through the darkness as the last guard disappeared around the corner. Lucas disabled the outer cameras with a tap, and the group ducked through a service door left unlocked by an inside contact who'd risked everything for a flash drive of hush money. Inside, the air was tinged with antiseptic and dread. Somewhere in the belly of this building, a dog was waiting for a rescue she might not even want. Through the dim corridors, Shadow led the way, nose to the linoleum, ignoring the trembling in Marcus's hands and the thunder of his own heart. They found the kennels quickly. Steel doors, soundproofed walls, cameras in every corner. Most runs were empty, just crates and the smell of fear. But in the last enclosure, under a harsh fluorescent bulb. A Malinois stared back at them, with wild, glassy eyes. "Echo," Boone breathed, recognition lacing his tone. She was rail-thin, her coat patchy, her body shaking, as if caught in some private storm. The second she saw Shadow, she snapped to attention, her posture morphing from cowering to menacing, lips curled, a low growl vibrating through the silence. Marcus inched forward, speaking softly, but Echo's stare was fixed on Shadow, unblinking, Shadow, for his part, didn't flinch. He simply sat and wagged his tail, offering the universal signal of peace. Boone frowned, scanning the room. Something's wrong. She's not herself. Lucas's tablet pinged. "Look at this," he whispered. "Echo's file. She's part of something called K9X. There are dosage logs. They've been injecting her with experimental compounds and," he stopped, eyes wide, "and programming her to respond to ultrasonic commands. They can control her aggression at the push of a button." Even as the realization dawned, a sudden pulse of high-pitched sound filled the room. Echo lunged at the bars, slavering, snarling, her entire body twisting in fury. Shadow barked, the sound sharp, desperate, trying to reach her, to break the trance. Boone swore and scanned for the source. Marcus spotted it, a speaker mounted high in the corner, blinking red. Without hesitating, Boone shot the device, the explosion echoing through the concrete. The noise stopped. Echo reeled, collapsed to the ground, chest heaving. Shadow whined and pressed himself against the bars, his body language radiating calm. Slowly, Echo seemed to recognize him, not as an enemy, but as one of her own. Her tail thumped weakly, once. Time was running out. Alarms began to blare. Lucas's face went pale as he pulled up the security feed. "They're coming, fast." Boone yanked the kennel door open and hauled Echo into his arms, Marcus covering their retreat as Shadow pressed at his side. In the control room, Marcus scanned for anything that could blow this operation wide open. He found it, a wall map, red dots scattered across the country. "These are other holding sites," Lucas said, snapping photos. "If we get this out, if people know K9S are being used for black operations and then erased when they know too much." Boone didn't wait for the end of that sentence. "We're out of time." He hurled a stun grenade into the corridor as booted guards thundered closer. The explosion rattled the walls, buying them precious seconds. They sprinted for the exit, Echo staggering at first, then picking up speed as adrenaline and Shadow's silent guidance pulled her forward. Marcus's shoulder screamed with pain, the old wound tearing open again, but he pushed through, every ounce of training and desperation keeping him on his feet. As they burst into the cold night, Lucas jammed the gate, slamming it shut behind them. Headlights swung across the lot, guards in pursuit, but Boone was already hot-wiring their stolen van, shouting for everyone to get in. Shadow leapt into the back, Echo following, Boone gunning the engine just as shots sparked off the metal roof. They sped away, hearts pounding, adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. Only when they'd crossed the state line did Boone finally pull over, hands shaking. In the rear, Echo rested her head on Shadow's flank, her breathing ragged, but alive. Lucas handed Marcus the stolen files, eyes bright. "We have everything, the drugs, the commands, the map, the whole program exposed." In the hush of the Wyoming dawn, the full scale of what they'd uncovered settled over them. Shadow and Echo weren't just survivors. They were witnesses to a secret war. The question now was whether America was ready to hear the truth. But as word of a secret K9 program began leaking to journalists and social media, the pressure on Washington soared, and in the chaos that followed, the line between hero and traitor blurred forever. By the time Marcus and the team rolled back into Wingate, Montana, it felt as if the tiny town itself was holding its breath. The once peaceful streets, usually filled with families on their way to church or elderly couples enjoying coffee outside the diner, were now packed with a swirling mix of camera crews, activists, and angry voices. Makeshift banners fluttered in the wind, some proclaiming "Justice for K9S," and others warning "No more dangerous dogs." Vans from national news outlets blocked the square. Satellite dishes pointed like accusing fingers at the battered stone walls of the Wingate shelter. Marcus had thought war zones were chaotic. He was wrong. The heartland of America, thrust under the harsh glare of national scrutiny, was a powder keg. Shadow stayed close at Marcus's side, the big shepherd's body tense and senses sharp, his presence both a comfort and a lightning rod for the crowd's attention. Children pointed and whispered, and mothers clutched them closer. It didn't matter that Shadow wore the scars of a hero's life. His story had become a national Rorschach, the dog himself an unwilling symbol in a country tearing itself apart over questions of race, justice, and trust. Boone, always quick with a dry joke, kept his hand near the tranquilizer gun on his belt, not for Shadow, but for the rising threat in the air. Even the locals, who'd once nodded to Marcus on the street, eyed him with suspicion or even outright hostility. The wind carried the echo of last night's cable news, angry pundits, endless panels, and a hashtag war fought from living rooms thousands of miles away. Marcus caught snatches of arguments, accusations that he was stirring up trouble, countered by others demanding the town reckon with its past. The Wingate town square had never seen a crowd like this. Protesters, activists from both sides, and curious onlookers all but filled the space between the old brick courthouse and the modest white church. On one side, Black Lives Matter banners rippled alongside signs reading "Save Shadow, Stop the Cover-Up." On the other hand, locals and outside agitators clutched placards reading "No more second chances for vicious dogs" and "Protect our town." Between the two camps, lines of exhausted deputies tried to keep order, while drone cameras buzzed overhead, streaming every confrontation to the world. The Wingate Town Council, under pressure from every side, announced an emergency public meeting. By the time Marcus and Boone arrived at the old town hall, the line stretched around the block. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Council members sweating under the lights, cameras capturing every twitch and whisper. Marcus took a seat in the back. Shadow curled at his feet, his coat brushed to a dull shine, though his eyes never left the door. Drama erupted almost immediately. Before the meeting even began, a leaked video surfaced online, a shaky phone recording of a closed-door session days before. In the clip, town council leaders were caught discussing a plan to rid Wingate of any canine who couldn't be trusted. The language was ugly, explicit, and left little room for doubt. They saw Shadow, and dogs like him, as liabilities, not heroes. The video exploded on social media, hashtags trending in minutes, and within an hour, the council president was forced to take the stage to a chorus of boos and shouts. A reporter from a major network pushed her way to Marcus, shoving a microphone in his face. "Marcus, does this leaked video prove what you've been saying all along? That there's a coordinated cover-up to eliminate K9S who serve with black handlers?" Boone bristled at the tone, but Marcus kept his voice steady. "I think it proves that too many people are willing to trade the truth for their sense of safety. But you can't erase the facts, and you can't erase Shadow's service." The meeting itself devolved quickly into chaos. Angry residents took the microphone to denounce both Marcus and the council, some venting decades-old grievances about racism and power in Wingate. Others stood to defend the town's traditions, insisting the council had acted only out of concern for public safety. A handful spoke up for Shadow, their voices raw with emotion, recounting stories of dogs who had saved lives in Afghanistan, on city streets, and right here in Montana. As the debate raged, a disturbance erupted outside. A commotion on the square, shouting, a scuffle. Marcus tensed, as did Shadow. In the swirl of the crowd, a group of agitators targeted a young black boy, Caleb, son of one of Marcus's army friends, who'd come to the meeting for support. Threats and jeers flew, the mob shoving him back. It happened so fast, few saw who threw the first punch, but everyone saw what happened next. Shadow, leashless but laser-focused, broke from Marcus's side. He pushed through the wall of legs, barked a warning so sharp the mob froze, and planted himself squarely between Caleb and the furious adults. In a single moment, the entire narrative shifted. The scene was caught from multiple angles. Phones, news cameras, drones, and streamed live to 1,000,000 screens. Shadow didn't snarl, didn't attack. He simply stared down the crowd, hackles raised, body blocking Caleb, until Marcus pushed forward to sweep the terrified boy into his arms. The story changed in real time, from dangerous canine to protector in the chaos. The crowd stilled, the drama etched on every face. Back inside the meeting, word spread of what Shadow had done. A spontaneous cheer erupted, led by those who doubted Marcus most. Council members scrambled to regain control, but the momentum had shifted. Still, the threats remained. Before Marcus could even catch his breath, a stern-faced federal official in a Navy suit approached. Her badge flashed, Department of Homeland Security. Her words were as cold as the Montana wind. For the safety of this community and your own, Mr. Hayes, I am officially requesting that you relinquish Shadow to federal custody until we can guarantee everyone's protection. I expect your answer within the hour. Marcus stared at her, his resolve steel beneath the exhaustion. He had survived combat, betrayal, and every manner of injustice, but the fight for Shadow's life was only beginning. But as the sun set over Windgate, the nation watched and waited, hungry for the next move in a battle that now threatened to consume the very soul of the town itself. The morning after the explosive events in Windgate, Marcus barely had time to catch his breath before his phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. He answered, expecting another call from local media or perhaps Boone, but instead found himself patched into a high-level conference call. The crackle of voices, the cold efficiency of bureaucratic greetings, and the weight of what was to come settled over him like an icy shroud. He sat at the battered kitchen table of Boone's safe house, the blinds drawn tight. Shadow sprawled at his feet. Boone leaned against the doorframe, face grave, as the names on the line were announced. The governor of Montana herself, a representative from the Department of Homeland Security, Marcus's attorney patched in from New York, and a moderator from the state's legal department. The atmosphere was instantly suffocating. Every word felt like it might be carved in stone. Governor Ashland spoke first, her tone clipped and precise, masking any hint of sympathy. Mr. Hayes, let's not waste time. The situation in Windgate has escalated beyond local control. Your refusal to relinquish custody of Shadow, in light of growing unrest, constitutes a potential threat to public safety. We are prepared to issue a writ of compulsory surrender for the animal, effective immediately. Marcus's mouth went dry. He gripped the phone, forcing his voice to remain steady. Governor, with all due respect, Shadow is not a threat. He's the only reason a child is alive after yesterday's riot. This is about more than just a dog. There are facts you haven't seen. A cold silence. The Homeland Security rep broke in. Mr. Hayes, under the Internal Security and Public Order statutes, any asset deemed a public risk can be seized for investigation. If you do not comply, we will pursue criminal charges. Child endangerment, obstruction, harboring a dangerous animal. We are not bluffing. Marcus glanced at Boone, who clenched his jaw and quietly began texting someone. Marcus's lawyer, sharp-voiced and New York direct, cut in. My client has cooperated at every stage. If this is intimidation, we'll see you in federal court. But the officials were relentless, clearly reading from prepared statements, yet every word dripped with threat. The governor pressed again, painting Marcus as someone recklessly putting his daughter, Layla, in the crosshairs by refusing federal custody for Shadow. As the call continued, Boone hustled to his laptop, reaching out to a growing network of veterans groups. He fired off urgent messages. They're coming after Marcus. Mobilize support. Get the truth out. No more silence. By noon, military forums, private group chats, and social media feeds flickered to life as veterans from across the country began posting their own stories, testaments of loyalty, sacrifice, and the irreplaceable bond between handlers and their K9S. Boone was tireless, refusing to let the narrative be dictated solely by politicians and bureaucrats. Meanwhile, Marcus was pressed against a wall. Every threat, every legal term, every warning felt like another weight on his chest. He heard the underlying message. Give up, Shadow, or we'll ruin your life. Maybe worse. For a moment he thought of Layla, her wide, hopeful eyes, the way she clung to Shadow's photo every night. He'd already failed her once, letting the world tear their family apart. Could he risk it again? Suddenly, as if on cue, Boone tossed him an envelope, its edges worn, his name scrawled in a child's handwriting. Marcus opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a single sheet, crayon lines, misspelled words, and the fierce honesty only a daughter could write. Dad, I know you're scared, but I'm not. I believe in you and Shadow. Please don't let them take him. Don't let the bad guys win. You're my hero. Love, Layla. The words hit him harder than any threat. The phone was still on speaker, voices still droning about legal precedent and imminent risk, but Marcus wasn't listening anymore. Something inside him crystallized. He looked down at Shadow, whose eyes, for all their weariness, still held a spark of loyalty that nothing, no government, no threat, no smear campaign, could erase. He raised his voice. Governor Ashland, I appreciate your concern for public safety, but I refuse to turn over Shadow. He saved lives, mine, my daughter's, and a dozen others. What's happening here isn't about safety. It's about silencing the truth. I will not be intimidated, and if you come for us, you better be ready to answer to the people watching from all over this country, because I won't be quiet, and I won't let you destroy what's left of my family." The line crackled with stunned silence. His attorney tried to cut in, but the conference exploded into chaos as officials shouted, threatened, and promised every legal avenue would be used to force compliance. But Marcus had made up his mind. After the call, the tension in the room was electric. Boone, ever the strategist, looked at Marcus with renewed respect. "You just declared war on half the state and the feds. You sure you're ready for what comes next?" Marcus folded Layla's letter, slipping it into his pocket. "I'm ready to show the world what's going on." Together they began uploading every classified document, every internal memo, every whistleblower testimony about K9X, the secret government program that had created, used, and discarded dogs like Shadow for missions too dangerous or too controversial for public view. They blasted it to the internet, sent it to every major media outlet, and dropped it on activist forums and veterans groups alike. By the end of the day, the truth was no longer something the government could contain. It was out there, messy, raw, undeniable, and as the media storm grew to a hurricane, Marcus watched the world react. But this time, for the first time in months, he felt the faintest flicker of hope. With the storm breaking, all that remained was to fight for the only family he had left. If the day before had felt like war, this day was the uprising. From a makeshift media room carved out of Boone's safe house, Marcus and his allies watched as the files, the entire digital mountain of evidence, began to go live. Megan Rowe, her eyes rimmed red from a sleepless night, was already fielding calls from every national news outlet in the country. She typed with a furious focus, answering questions from CNN, the New York Times, and podcasts desperate for an exclusive with the soldier at the center of America's latest moral earthquake. Lucas, hands shaking, managed the technical side. He uploaded videos, leaked unredacted documents, and monitored the pulse of the web as it throbbed and spasmed with each new revelation. Every hour brought new evidence, grainy footage of K9S being worked to collapse, medical records falsified to conceal injuries, and internal memos ordering the destruction of problematic assets. Clips showed not just Shadow, but a dozen other dogs, each one a hero to their handler, each one discarded or manipulated the moment they became an inconvenience. By noon, the hashtag #ProtectOurK9S was trending on every platform. Strangers posted photos with their service dogs, stories of loyalty and bravery, demanding change in a country that had so often forgotten the silent heroes on four legs. Twitter feeds blazed with fury. Facebook groups sprang up in solidarity, and 1 million Americans watched the raw, unfiltered videos of Shadow cowering after being drugged and manipulated, now fully aware of the conspiracy that had tried to erase him. In Washington, cable news anchors used words like shocking, systemic abuse, and watershed moment. A congressional committee announced an emergency hearing. Local protests spread to state capitals, from Sacramento to Atlanta. Hundreds gathered outside city halls and courthouses, their signs reading, "Dogs deserve better, heroes not evidence, and no more silence." Across the country, canine units were hailed and honored. In some towns, children left bouquets at police stations in tribute to the dogs whose lives had been thrown away. But as the tide of public opinion turned, the human cost surfaced. That afternoon, Boone read aloud from his phone, voice cracking. "They found Councilman Archer dead this morning. Suicide." The pressure. He was under federal investigation. The feds found thousands in bribes linked to the canine disposal contracts. Marcus was silent, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. He thought of the men and women who'd stood by while dogs were mistreated and evidence was destroyed. He remembered the hatred and threats, the times he'd nearly walked away from the fight. Now, as the truth detonated on live TV, the cost of speaking out was becoming clear. Guilt, shame, even death. The ripple effect was unstoppable. Megan faced the camera for a live stream watched by millions. "America, this is our reckoning. These documents prove that K9S, our most loyal protectors, were used, abused, and erased by those who feared the truth. It's time for justice. It's time for change. Let Shadow be the face of that change." At that moment, the camera cut to Shadow, now sitting tall at Marcus's side, his coat patchy from old wounds, but his posture proud. his eyes meeting the lens with a gaze that seemed to challenge the nation. Will you let them do this again? The story swept across America in waves. State legislatures debated emergency reforms. A senator from Illinois demanded a federal canine Bill of Rights. We failed these animals, she said, but we can right that wrong. Starting today, Shadow became a symbol not just for animal lovers or veterans, but for anyone who had ever lost faith in the system and found hope in loyalty. Then came the invitations. Marcus received emails, calls, and official letters. One from the White House, another from the Congressional Animal Welfare Caucus. They wanted Shadow in Washington to stand before Congress as the living, breathing proof of a system gone wrong and a country trying, at last, to do better. The news was barely a day old when Marcus got the call that would chill him to the core. It was just after midnight, with the house quiet and everyone else asleep. He almost didn't answer the blocked number, but instinct drew him to it. A distorted voice, electronically disguised, hissed through the line. You think this is over, Hayes? It's not. You and your mutt have made powerful enemies. You're playing with fire, and people close to you will get burned if you don't walk away now. Marcus didn't flinch. You've already tried, and you failed. The country knows the truth. We're not afraid of you. A laugh, a joyless, chilling sound. This is bigger than you, bigger than any one man or dog. Enjoy your 15 minutes. You'll wish you never dug up the past. The call ended. Boone, who'd been standing nearby, saw the fear in Marcus's eyes but also the resolve. Marcus looked down at Shadow, who gazed back, unwavering. He thought of Layla's letter. He thought of the men who died protecting their K9S and the families still waiting for justice. There was no turning back, not now. As the sun rose, the invitation arrived. Official, embossed, and undeniable. Shadow was requested in Washington as the new symbol for a movement that would change history. What no one realized yet was that the real enemy, the one who had orchestrated it all, had only just begun to fight back. With America watching, Marcus prepared for a showdown that would test the very heart of the country's soul. Washington, D.C. at night seemed alive with tension, a city never truly asleep, every marble column and shadowed corridor humming with secrets. A heavy door opened, and a man stepped in with a presence that silenced the room. No introduction was needed. Everyone in Washington knew of him. Samuel R. Daltrey, former National Security Advisor, architect of several classified programs, now a shadowy figure in the world of lobbying and consulting. He was a kingmaker who had crossed into legend, the kind of man who could start or end wars with a phone call. Marcus recognized the predatory confidence in his eyes immediately, the kind that came from holding lives in one's hand for decades. Daltrey wasted no time. He turned directly to Marcus, voice smooth as silk, but cold as the Potomac in winter. Mr. Hayes, you've caused quite the stir. There are people in this town who don't appreciate their dirty laundry being aired on national television. For your own sake, and your daughter's, you'd be wise to stop. A beat of silence. Marcus felt the weight of Shadow's head press against his boot, the only steady comfort in the room. If you're here to threaten me, do it straight. I'm tired of cowards hiding behind legalese. A flash of annoyance in Daltrey's eyes, quickly masked by a false smile. You misunderstand. I'm here to help you make the right decision. Washington can be a very forgiving place, Mr. Hayes. All it takes is your cooperation. Stay quiet about what you've learned. Let the dust settle, and your family will remain safe. Otherwise, he trailed off. But the message was clear. Megan pressed record on her phone without breaking eye contact, her thumbs steady now. Are you threatening a witness before Congress, Mr. Daltrey? She said, her voice soft but unmistakably lethal. Daltrey didn't even look her way. Miss Rowe, you're a journalist, I presume? Sometimes stories cost more than they pay. I'd hate to see either of you lose what matters most, especially with a child in the picture. Marcus's anger boiled, but he forced it down, remembering Layla's letter, her faith in him, and Shadow. I don't bow to men like you, and you won't touch my daughter. Try anything and this city will burn with what I know. Daltrey smiled thinly, eyes dead. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Washington will give you one more chance, Mr. Hayes. Don't waste it. With that, he turned and walked out, security trailing after him, leaving the room colder than before. Megan let out a breath she'd been holding. Got the whole thing, she whispered, waving her phone. Enough to hang him in the court of public opinion at least. But Marcus's thoughts were elsewhere. If Daltrey had come in person, things would have been worse than they'd imagined. That night at the hotel, under federal protection, Marcus couldn't sleep. He paced, double-checked every lock, his nerves wired tight. Shadow moved with him, always between Marcus and the door, always watching. At 3 a.m., as the city outside shimmered with distant sirens and blue lights, Shadow suddenly stiffened, ears sharp, nose quivering. He nosed a vent cover near the bed, then began to growl, a low, unmistakable warning. Marcus found the tiny device wedged behind the vent, a high-grade transmitter, no bigger than a thumb drive. Someone was listening, even inside what should have been a secure federal hotel. Marcus crushed the bug in a napkin and flushed it. "We can't stay here," he told Shadow. "They know everything." A quick call to Boone set things in motion. Within an hour, Marcus and Megan had slipped out the back, Shadow's leash taut as they wound through alleyways to a waiting car. Boone drove, his face grim, Lucas in the passenger seat, scanning for trackers. The car headed out of D.C., vanishing into the Maryland night, every eye peeled for pursuit. Marcus's phone vibrated, a new alert. This time, the news was good. Senator Arthur Galloway, a decorated Marine and one of the few openly black veterans in Congress, had called for a national hearing, live on television. Marcus Hayes and Canine Shadow are American heroes. We owe them a platform, not a prison. I demand Congress give them the hearing they deserve. Within hours, Galloway's words spread like wildfire. Veterans, activists, and animal welfare supporters rallied. The government's story was cracking. But for every ally stepping into the light, the shadows seemed to grow deeper and more dangerous. Even as Marcus planned his next move, news came from Boone. "Heads up, Marcus. The organization just froze our accounts and posted bounties on anyone helping us. Lucas's family is in hiding. Megan's newsroom is under attack from cyber hackers. We're not just in the news now, we're the target." Marcus gripped Shadow's collar. He could feel the noose tightening, but also something else. Momentum. For the first time, the people who mattered were standing with them, refusing to back down. They were not alone anymore, but the organization was finished playing defense. In the silence of a new safe house, Marcus stared at Megan's recording. Shadow rested at his side, his breathing deep, alert even in sleep. "It's war now," Marcus whispered, not just to himself but to the dog, who'd never given up on him. Tomorrow, they'd walk into Congress, not as victims, but as the spark of a revolution. But even as they prepared, the organization moved to strike back, and the cost of the truth was about to climb even higher. The interstate's glow faded quickly behind them, leaving only the pulse of hazard lights reflected in the rear view. Boone gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles whitened, his jaw set, eyes flicking from side mirrors to the winding road ahead. Marcus sat in the back, cradling Layla close, every muscle coiled for disaster. Shadow paced in the narrow space between the seats, restless, a living alarm ready to spring into action. Lucas, in the passenger seat, worked furiously on his laptop, trying to stay awake. His face was pale, marked with blood from a gash that still seeped beneath a makeshift bandage. The world had shrunk to the tight, fearful space inside that SUV, haunted by the knowledge that someone, no, a whole network of someones, wanted them erased. Somewhere behind, a pair of headlights lingered too long in the darkness. Then another set, closing in. Boone cursed under his breath. "They're back. 4 o'clock. Hang tight." Marcus's mind spun with the information Lucas had managed to recover. Encrypted files, fragments of email chains, a spreadsheet of names and dates that chilled the blood. He scrolled through the list on Lucas's battered laptop. 24 names, all handlers in K9S, all marked as terminated or missing. Only Shadow's line remained incomplete, the last living thread. Layla whispered, "Dad, are they coming after us?" Her small hand trembled in his. Marcus squeezed it, his voice quiet but fierce. "We're together. That's all that matters right now." Suddenly, Shadow let out a guttural, sharp bark, a sound Marcus recognized from deployment, the warning that preceded every ambush. Boone saw the signal, veered off the main road onto a gravel turnoff, headlights flicking off. The world went black, the only sound the grinding of stones under tires. They killed the engine, everyone holding their breath. Shadow crept to the rear window, ears flattened, nose pressed to the cold glass. Seconds stretched into eternity. Through the trees, the chasing vehicles roared past, missing them by inches. Only when the last tail light disappeared into the distance did anyone breathe. Boone exhaled shakily. That was too close. Lucas winced, clutching his side, blood seeping faster. "We can't keep running. They'll find us." His voice shook, not from fear but from blood loss. There's a cabin ahead. Remote. It was a safe house for informants years ago. I'll send you the GPS. They limped down side roads for half an hour, Marcus holding pressure on Lucas's wound. Shadow pressed close to Layla, every movement attuned to her fear, offering the kind of comfort only a dog, only this dog, could give. Finally, they reached a run-down cabin, tucked into the trees, shielded from the highway by a wall of evergreens. Boone hustled Lucas inside, Marcus following with Layla and Shadow. The door slammed and was bolted tight. Boone dragging a bookshelf across for good measure. The place smelled of dust, old coffee, and fear. Layla curled up in a corner, Marcus covering her with his jacket. Boone scavenged for supplies, Lucas propped against the kitchen wall, laptop open. Sweat beaded on his brow. Passwords. Echo 419. All caps. He struggled for breath. It'll unlock the drive. You'll find everything. Proof. Not just about Shadow, but all of us. The project. The blacklist. The hits. His voice faltered. Marcus knelt beside him, pushing a bottle of water into his hand. Stay with me, Lucas. We're not done yet. Lucas's eyes fluttered, then shut. Boone found a med kit and got to work, but Marcus knew Lucas's odds were getting worse by the hour. Marcus fired up the encrypted drive, pages and pages of reports, redacted orders, photographs. There it was. The K9X program. Stamped, eyes only. Handlers accused of non-compliance. K9S marked for destruction or transfer to experimental partners. The file named every target, every handler, every dog, termination methods. Marcus felt sick. One photo stood out. A younger Shadow, muzzled, chained, a handler's blood staining his fur. But the report attached, now decrypted, showed what happened. Shadow had intervened when his handler was attacked by a rogue agent, saving lives. The official story was a fabrication, meant to justify erasing Shadow, silencing a living witness. Layla read over Marcus's shoulder, her voice small but clear. They lied about all of them, Daddy. Why would they do that? Marcus struggled for words, rage simmering beneath the surface. Some people think they're above the law, sweetheart, but not for long. Suddenly, the sound of movement outside, the crunch of gravel, footsteps on old wood. Shadow tensed, a low growl rising in his chest. Boone killed the cabin lights. Marcus gathered Layla and Lucas, pushing them behind an old armoire. Boone took position at the window, pistol ready. A trio of figures crept through the trees, flashlights darting. Boone recognized the tactical formation instantly. Mercenaries. The back door rattled. Marcus held Layla close, whispering reassurances. Shadow was silent now, but in a stance that said no one would pass him alive. The first assailant burst in. Boone fired a warning shot, sending him diving for cover. Shadow lunged at the second, fangs bared, a blur of motion as he intercepted the intruder before the man could reach Marcus and Layla. The mercenaries, outnumbered and unprepared for a war dog's fury, panicked. In the chaos, Marcus dragged Lucas out a side window, Boone covering them. Layla scrambled after, Shadow darting to her side, licking her cheek once. A promise, a signal, a comfort. The cabin behind them erupted in gunfire, but by then, the group had vanished into the woods. For 2 miles they staggered through darkness, breathed, ragged, hearts pounding, until Boone finally led them to a second, older truck, hidden beneath a camo tarp. They sped away, battered but alive. Dawn crept over the horizon as they reached a safe place to stop. Marcus booted up Lucas's drive again, downloading the final piece of the puzzle, a document labeled Blacklist. It contained not just a list of K9S, but also every handler targeted for removal, dates, methods, even payments to assassins. Shadow was the last on the list, the only one left who could testify. Marcus stared at the screen, heart thundering. Layla looked up at him, brave and tired. What do we do now? Marcus met Boone's eyes. We end this. No more running. As Shadow settled at their feet, ever watchful, Marcus began outlining the plan that would bring the whole conspiracy crashing down, exposing the truth not only to the government but to the entire nation. But as the sun rose, one thing was certain. The next battle would decide everything. The marble pillars of the federal courthouse rose like silent sentinels against the morning sky, their cold grandeur a stark reminder that justice in America was never guaranteed, only fought for. Reporters thronged the wide steps, microphones jostling, as a current of anticipation ran through the crowd. Protesters and supporters pressed close to the barricades, their chants and banners, "Protect our heroes," "Justice for K9S," competing for attention. Inside, the air was thick with anxiety, hope, and a sense of historical gravity. In the vast courtroom, the tension was palpable. Marcus was joined by Boone, Megan Rowe, and Lucas, his allies in the fight that had brought a government to its knees. The opposing tables were crowded with men in suits, the organization's legal team, flanked by cold-eyed officials, and representatives of the shadowy program that had started it all. At the front, presiding over the case, was Judge Pennington, renowned for his strict adherence to the rule of law and utter intolerance for spectacle. The trial began with testimony from those who had suffered most, former handlers like Marcus, whose lives had been upended by betrayal, families whose dogs had vanished in the night, experts who catalogued years of malfeasance and deception. Shadow's presence was electrifying. When the judge finally allowed Marcus to bring him forward, there was a hush. The dog stood by his handler's side, watching the proceedings with intelligent, wounded eyes. "Mr. Hayes," the defense lawyer began, voice slick and practiced, "isn't it true that dogs like Shadow, while heroic, can pose a threat to public safety when not properly managed? That your case demonstrate the dangers of treating these animals as anything other than property of the state?" Marcus met his gaze with quiet steel. "No, sir. The real danger is pretending that loyalty and bravery are disposable. Shadow risked his life for people who turned on him the moment it was convenient. He's not a threat. He's a scapegoat, and so are the other dogs whose stories we haven't heard." The lawyer pressed on, trying to cast doubt, but Megan and Boone's documentation, videos, service records, the damning blacklist, made their arguments ring hollow. Every clip shown, Shadow saving a child, Shadow at Marcus's side under fire, drew murmurs of sympathy from the public gallery. But the true turning point arrived when, in a moment of silence, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened and a witness stepped forward. Anthony Crowder, a former mid-level operative in the clandestine K9 program. He looked nervous, glancing at the judge and then at Marcus. When asked to testify, Crowder's voice shook. "We were given direct orders. If a handler started asking questions, if a dog showed signs of being unmanageable, especially if their loyalty was to the handler and not the system, they were to be transferred, isolated, or put down. I forged documents. I did it because I was told it was for national security, but I know now it was a lie. The order came from higher up than any of us knew, and Shadow, he was marked because he was loyal, not because he was dangerous." The courtroom froze, the admission echoing off marble and wood. The lead attorney for the defense tried to object, but Judge Pennington silenced him with a look. "Let the witness speak." The packed gallery erupted with whispers. The spell of official secrecy had been broken. Now, as the opposing counsel scrambled to contain the damage, more witnesses followed. Veterinarians who'd treated abused K9s, tech experts who decrypted the blacklist, even Layla, her small voice unwavering as she told the judge, "Shadow saved my life. He's good. He's family." By midday, the evidence had reached critical mass. Marcus's legal team, bolstered by outside civil rights groups, hammered home their point. K9s were not just tools. They were sentient beings, partners, and, in many cases, victims of a system that used them and threw them away. Every word, every photograph, every tear shed by those on the stand pulled the gallery and the country closer to the heart of the matter. The climax arrived when Judge Pennington, after a tense sidebar with the lawyers, returned to her bench. Her words carried the gravity of a gavel yet to fall. "In light of the evidence and the credible testimony of Mr. Crowder, this court finds it necessary to prohibit any destruction or forced retirement of service animals until a fair and transparent investigation can be completed. Furthermore, the treatment of canine units and their handlers will be subject to independent review. This is not just a question of property, but of partnership and justice." A collective gasp swept the room. Marcus closed his eyes, overwhelmed, as Layla hugged Shadow. Her tears of relief mirrored on the faces across the gallery. The drama was not over. Appeals would be filed, policies debated, tempers would flare, but for the first time there was hope. Across America, the story had ripple effects no one could have predicted. At high schools in cities and towns far from Montana, students debated the case of Shadow in civics classes, learning not just about the legal system, but about empathy and resilience. Minority communities drew strength from Marcus's example. sharing how the fight for Shadow had become a rallying cry for equal treatment in their struggles. Veterans who once felt discarded found new purpose as advocates for animal rights, inspired by the bond between a soldier and his faithful dog. On a soft autumn afternoon, with golden leaves falling outside, Layla knelt on the grass, tossing a faded tennis ball for Shadow. The dog, older, maybe a bit stiff, but still so full of heart, bounded after it, tail wagging, with a joy that seemed to defy the weight of years. Marcus watched from the porch, smiling, as a gentle wind carried their laughter through the open window. Shadow's story shows us that even in the face of fear and injustice, loyalty and courage can ignite a movement, not just for one dog, but for countless lives touched by compassion and truth. If Shadow's journey moved you, what's one way you can stand up for those who cannot speak for themselves today? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales of hope and bravery. Remember, every act of kindness, every fight for justice, and every heart open to change brings us closer to a better world. Thank you for being part of this unforgettable journey.